All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Hello all. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to third edition of CloudEight Virtual Summit 2021. I hope you are having a great conference and you also will like our session, which is on bring your SharePoint apps to Microsoft Teams. So the quick overview of this session is we have been using SharePoint for several years, maybe more than 2 decades now. So that means we have various apps that we have been created on top of SharePoint for almost 2 decades. And then once we have those kind of an code with us or those kind of an apps which we are running on top of SharePoint, in this particular session, we will see how we can transform those apps into the Microsoft Teams app. So without writing or rewriting any kind of a code, we will see how we can bring all those apps that we have been writing on top of SharePoint to Microsoft Teams. Okay. All right. I hope that sets the context for this session. Firstly, thank you very much for our sponsors to sponsor this event, for their generosity to sponsor this event. Thank you very much for that. The agenda for this particular session is that we will see how the Microsoft Teams and SharePoint they are collaborating with each other. When the teams get created, how the SharePoint sites are leveraged and all those things. And then we will start moving into the more deeper concepts of how we can embed these SharePoint modern sites and pages, which we have been using as kind of an intranet pages or maybe the enterprise level site into the Microsoft Teams with the help of App Studio. And then we will look into the more development kind of an options like the apps or the web parts that we had been developing so far with SharePoint framework, that is SPFX, how we can port those with very simple tips and tricks to Microsoft Teams as an app. And then we can open up for Q&A. All right. Um, Before we start, a quick introduction. Myself, Nandadeep Nachan. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services. I'm from Pune, India, and author of couple of books on SharePoint framework as well as SharePoint hybrid with SharePoint 2019. And here are a few of the social handles for Twitter and LinkedIn to get in touch with me. And along with me today is Smita.
Hello all, I'm Smita Nasan. I'm from Pune, India. Greetings of today. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Microsoft MCT. I'm mostly working with SharePoint and Microsoft 365, and this is one of my book. And these are some of my social handles by which you can get in touch with me. So the agenda for this session is we will see how Microsoft Teams and SharePoint they better work with each other, how the collaboration between them, and then we will deep dive into the more aspects of SharePoint, and then how we can bring all of the apps that we have been developing with SharePoint so far to Microsoft Teams. So firstly, we will start with embedding the SharePoint modern sites and pages into the Microsoft Teams with the help of App Studio. And then we will see how we can bring all the modern customizations which are we are developing on top of the SharePoint using SPFX web parts or any other components to Microsoft Teams app. So let's come to the first point, Microsoft Teams and SharePoint history. I know this is very basic and everyone knows about this. However, still I wanted to keep this slide ahead of our discussion just to start with or just as a starting point. So what happens is whenever we create any of the team inside Microsoft Teams, it gradually creates a SharePoint site in the background. So for example, when we create a demo team, what it will do is it will spin up one SharePoint site called as slash site slash demo teams, and then under that we will have a shared documents wherein we can share all of the documents related to that team. And then again, for the general channel, there will be a folder called as a general, and as and when we keep creating the public channel, there will be a folder created under shared documents. At the same time, when we will have any of the private channel created, in that case, we will have a separate private site created with the private permission called as team hyphen private channel and name of the channel. And then again, we will follow the same structure. So in a nutshell, we will have one SharePoint site, and in the background for each of the Microsoft team that we develop. So this background, let's start with our session. So again, this is just to note that we have just celebrated the 20th birthday of SharePoint on March 20th, 2021. So that means we have been developing solutions on top of SharePoint for at least 20 years. So SharePoint has been serving us as an enterprise kind of a solution, or you can say a platform over the last 20 years. So obviously that means we have developed so many components inside SharePoint, and all those components could be or maybe a server side, but not that since but now that since we are moving gradually towards online, we are gradually even upgrading all those components to the online world. And then again, as we keep on developing all these solutions, those are maybe just not limited to SharePoint, because at least all those boundaries are now fading away between a SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. So the entire objective of this session is like we will see how we can bring all those SharePoint apps which we have been developing over the last 20 years to Microsoft Teams. So we will monitor this journey of transition from SharePoint apps to Microsoft Teams tab, like how we can still develop on top of SharePoint, but uh, how we can add the flavor of Microsoft Teams tab to our SharePoint apps. So let's firstly start with how we can embed the SharePoint site, which is serving as a background to Microsoft Teams inside a Microsoft Teams. So you can use a Microsoft Teams personal app model to pin any modern SharePoint pages to the left navigation of Microsoft Teams. And this provides a great opportunity to expose intranet landing pages to serve corporate communication needs directly accessible by Microsoft Teams users. So some of the example scenario you can include as adding your corporate intranet landing pages to Teams for easy discovery of news and contents. Then you can add a learning pathway solution to your Teams to embedded Microsoft 365 learning paths for your users. Also, you can add a single page communications on important topics for your company. So the target must be a SharePoint modern site or a page, and embedding classic publishing portals or other classic sites or the pages is not supported and will not work. A user can add a personal app from the apps link in Teams. A user can pin an app to the app bar from the leftmost navigation in Teams by right clicking it and choosing the pin option. Then the administrator can deploy and pin an app to all our targeted users from the Microsoft Teams admin center. And all the users accessing the embedded SharePoint page will need to have at least a read permission to access the page. And if a tenant, SharePoint site, or a page name or a URL is changed, then the team's personal app manifest will need to be updated. And if changes are made to the pinning model of modern SP pages or site, it could require you to delete the existing pin personal apps and redeploy them. So now let's see practically how we can do it. So you will need to use the App Studio or any other editor to create this Teams manifest file with the necessary URLs to your SharePoint pages. And to do that, we will open first this Microsoft Teams, and then you have to navigate to the Team Store by clicking Apps on the Teams app bar available in the left navigation. Once you are here, you have to use a search option to find the App Studio. Once you are able to find this App Studio, if it's already installed, it will give you option of open, and if it's not installed, then it will give you option of install. In my case, it is already installed, so I'm getting an option of open. So once we open that App Studio, you have to navigate to the Manifest Editor tab. Then you have to click Create a new app. Once you are here on this form, you have to provide a required app information. So the first thing is a short name that can be your company intranet, then the full name, then again you can decide as per your requirement. After that, you have to click generate to create a unique and random app ID. Once it is done, then you have to provide a package name and you have to use a value that is unique to your environment. The next thing is you have to provide a version number, and generally as a best practice we always start with 1.0.0. Then you have to provide a description for your internet application. The next thing is the full description. You can just provide. After that, you have to provide a developer information, your name, then the developer information website. So your website, company website, then the partner information, you can leave it empty. That's not a mandatory field. And after that, app URL. So this could be a pages in your portal. Then the terms of use. Also, this could be a page in your portal. Then there is a option of branding. So this could be visible on the app bar, left navigation, and in the app installation user interface. So you can see the branding guidance for the image and outline settings in Microsoft Teams edition official documentation from this learn more link. Once you have done, you have to navigate to the tabs under capabilities, and then you have to click add under the add personal tab. Once you do this, then you have to fill in the personal tab detail based on your own setup. So over here, you have to provide a name of intranet and then the entity ID. Use any random number. After that, the main thing you have to we have to highlight over here. It's about the content URL. So we will show you for the existing one we have done. Let me open it. So how you have to provide this content URL. Okay, so it's some of the issues. So for this content URL, so the first thing you have to provide HTTPS, yes, and then you have to provide a domain URL, then slash underscore layout slash 15 slash teamslogon.axpx, then the question mark SPFX is equal to 2 and destination is equal to page URL. So this way you have to form your content URL. So this is the syntax for it. So the URL will need to be encoded to avoid issues accessing it across the different devices. Then you have this website URL. So you can leave this optional value empty. Once it is done, then you have to navigate to the domains and permissions under the finish. Yeah. And make sure that domains from your tab, you have a domain on it. So for example, this is the domain. After that, you have to update a AAD app ID as shown, as highlighted over here. Yeah. The next thing, you have to include your domain URL to the single sign-on value. So this is for example. Yeah. Once it is done, you have to navigate to the test and distribute under the finished. And after that, install the solution to your usage by clicking the install. So this will enable you to test the configuration and validate the solution setup. And once you click on this add to install the application to your personal usage from the App Studio, then the next step is you have to verify that the application is working based on your objectives in the both in the web and as well as in a desktop. So one thing you have to notice over here that you can modify the settings by going back to App Studio and editing the manifest using the manifest editor. Also, you can deploy the app to all the users or targeted users by downloading the manifest from the App Studio and publishing it to the app catalog in a team administration. And to deploy these solutions to the users in your tenant, you must have a sufficient permissions to deploy apps in Microsoft Teams app catalog. So now let's see what are the gaps in user experience. So there is a no native navigation header or footer on embedded pages. Also, the search initiated from these teams will return a search result from a team itself and not a search results from the embedded SharePoint site. So you cannot create a content like news, pages, list or libraries in a Teams, and you must create a content from a SharePoint site using a web browser or a SharePoint mobile app. Also, the page comment feature is not available from the SharePoint pages when they are exposed in Microsoft Teams.
All right, so now that let's see all of the apps that we have been developing on top of SharePoint using something called as SharePoint Framework or SPFX. Those are our custom apps. So how we can even bring those apps which are specifically built for SharePoint into Microsoft Teams. So before I deep dive into that, firstly, just wanted to have the introduction to SharePoint Framework. So in the last few years, SharePoint Framework, or we generally call it as SPFX, has been a very popular and has become the first choice of modern SharePoint developers. The SharePoint Framework plays very important role in customizing modern SharePoint. At the same time, it also support classic SharePoint. The SPFX solutions are developed using open source toolchains, modern US standards, and even JavaScript libraries or frameworks like AngularJS, React.js, Knockout.js. Even you can use Handlebar.js. So you're open to use any of those open source libraries or frameworks. So this SPFX by the MSDN definition is kind of a page and web part model, which provides full support for client-side SharePoint development, and it offers easy integration with SharePoint data, and also we can extend it to Microsoft Teams, which is the major topic of discussion for this session. So with the SPFX, we can use modern web technologies and tools in our preferred development environment. So even it could be Windows or Linux, or even it could be Mac OS. And then we can build the productive experiences and apps which are responsive and mobile ready. So this SPFX is generally available into SharePoint Online. At the same time, even we can use them in SharePoint on-premises versions with SharePoint 2016 and SharePoint 2019. So whenever we talk about the SharePoint, so SharePoint has got sites, and in that site we store our data in the form of list or libraries. So we upload documents to the document libraries, or even we create few list items. So all of the data in SharePoint gets stored in the form of list or libraries. And then eventually when the or how the usage will grow, we will have more number of content coming into the SharePoint. And then we have something called as this SharePoint framework or SPFX, which is a modern development tool on top of SharePoint. So with this SPFX, we can build some kind of an meaningful web part which can represent that data in a various meaningful ways to our end users. At the same time, even we can create the configurable web parts. So in the left hand side, you can see the configurable pane, and based on the settings which are configured in that particular pane, the SPFX web part can show those details or render that information onto the SharePoint page. So we are free to use any of this approach. And then um, the one thing that we want to highlight here is that SPFX is not just for SharePoint, but it is very way beyond that, very way beyond SharePoint. And now that we can use SPFX as the enterprise level kind of a solution, or building those enterprise level of solutions. So firstly, that SPFX can be extended to Microsoft Teams to build Microsoft Teams tab, even to build Teams personal app. Even we can build Microsoft Teams messaging extensions with the help of SPFX. And even with the recent launch of SPFX version 1.12, even we can create the meeting apps based on Microsoft Teams. Second thing is that it is not just limited to Microsoft Teams, but even we can use that along with or in conjunction with Microsoft Graph. So we can make various Graph API calls to the other apps and services inside Microsoft 365. We can interact with all those Microsoft 365 apps and services by sending the information or getting the information, and then we can represent that data onto the SharePoint site or even onto the Microsoft Teams. Thirdly, even we can call the Power Automate flows from SPFX. So on a click of a button, for example, if you want to automate few things, even it is possible with SPFX. And lastly, we can also build add-ins for Outlook using SPFX. So at this moment of time, those add-ins are only available as a web version. We cannot use them onto the desktop version, but sooner there will be a support for this. So with that, let's come to our main point of discussion, like how we can build this Microsoft Teams extensibility with the SPFX, or how we can extend those SPFX apps to Microsoft Teams. Okay, so the Teams extensibility with SharePoint framework has got its own benefit, that it has got benefits of using SharePoint framework as platform for Microsoft Teams tab. So the development model is very much similar to SharePoint framework web parts, and then any of the web part can be exposed as a tab or a personal app inside Microsoft Teams. Even SPFX offers some kind of a different scoping option to expose your SPFX web part as a custom tab or personal app. So we will see this scoping option when we will go to the code part. And then again, your tab will be executed in the context of underlying SharePoint site behind the specific team. So this means that you can take advantage of any SharePoint specific APIs or functionalities inside your web part. So with this, firstly see how we can build the Teams tab with SPFX. So with the release of SharePoint Framework version 1.8, Microsoft introduced the possibility to build tabs in Microsoft Teams using SharePoint Framework solutions, which means any of your SharePoint Framework solution can now be easily ported to Microsoft Teams without any need for external services. The values that we specify here into the supported host, for example, Teams tab, it decides how user will be able to work with your web part. So for example, if we specify this value as a Teams tab, that particular SPFX web part can be hosted inside Microsoft Teams as a tab. On the other hand, for example, if we specify that value, that supported host value as a Teams personal app, in that case, same SPFX web part can be utilized as a personal app inside Microsoft Teams. So quickly, let's discuss how we can even build those personal apps with SPFX. So again, as a part of SPFX version 1.10, you can also publish your SPFX solutions as a Microsoft Teams personal app. So a personal app in Microsoft Team is an app that user can install and then it can be accessed through the left rail of this Microsoft Teams. So this is very simple, but I just want to give you a demo of that. So for that purpose, I will go back to my SharePoint site. And this is one example of a simplest SPFX web part that can be built. So this is the out of box behavior of SPFX web part. And now you can see that this particular SPFX web part, for example, if I click on edit, you will be able to see the properties pane for this particular SPFX web part from here. So this SPFX web part right now is hosted inside SharePoint site. And from here, it is able to detect that context of SharePoint site and it is able to get the information about that SharePoint site. So for example, we are simply showing the title of this SharePoint site here, but it is not just limited to the title. We can go beyond. We can get the information about the entire SharePoint site, the list, the users, and even another settings that we have inside SharePoint site. And then we will be able to create those fancy looking web parts. But I just wanted to make it to the simplest form to understand this concept better, and then we can go into the more details one. So this is just the SPFX web part, which is right now hosted on top of SharePoint site. Secondly, let's say we want to use this same web part in Microsoft Teams. So again, with the help of this supported host, which we will see in a moment, so we can host that SPFX web part into a Microsoft Teams as a Teams tab. So let's see how it works. So for that purpose, I just went to one of my teams called as Busted Minds. And here I have already added that particular web part as a Teams app. So even from here, you can click add a tab. From here, you should be able to find out that web part like this Teams tab. And then once you add it, this is how it will be shown. So if you compare these two side by side, um, these two are nothing but the same web part. So when this web part is hosted in the SharePoint context, it is able to detect that and it renders all the information related to SharePoint site. At the same time, when this web part is hosted in Microsoft Teams, it can detect that underlying context of Microsoft Teams, and then it starts to pull up all the information about Microsoft Teams. So for example, since this particular web part is hosted in a team called as Busted Minds, it is able to detect that and then it can give that information. And then again, it is not just or limited to the team name, but again, we can go beyond this. Even we will be able to get the information about the channels, the members, even the underlying SharePoint site that we have, and then we'll be able to present that information. Quickly, like just want to show from where we can configure those supported hosts. So this is the SPFX web part code that we have. We will see like how we can generate this, but simply that the supported host can be set from here. So in a nutshell, the supported host is by default set to SharePoint web part. That means any of the app that we have been developing now can be hosted on a SharePoint site only. Secondly, for example, if you just set it to Teams personal app, in that case, this SPFX app can be extended to Microsoft Teams as a personal app. Even, for example, if you set it to Teams tab, then this same SPFX web part or app can be extended to Microsoft Teams as a tab. So this was very simple example, but now that let's move to some kind of an complex examples and see how we can utilize this SPFX web part in more better way to Microsoft Teams. So the third option that we have is we can host SPFX web part as a messaging extension inside Microsoft Teams. So SharePoint Framework version 1.11 supports to host our SPFX web part as Microsoft Teams messaging extension. So this offers more power to the developers so that now they can extend SPFX web part to Microsoft Teams as a messaging extension. So the messaging extensions are nothing but if you see the bottom of this Microsoft Teams, so from here we will be able to click click a link, and then from there okay, it is taking some time, but yeah, and from there it will show up some kind of an pop-up and we will be able to take action in that particular pop-up. So let's say for example, I just want to keep it very simple. If I click on Giphy GIF, um, I can click on any of that GIF, it will be available to be sent as a message, and from here we'll be able to send that message. So this one is out of the box. So let's see how we can create our own using those SPFX and then port it to Microsoft Teams. So just want to deep dive into this kind of a demo, and then we will create some kind of a planet explorer. So planet explorer are like we have a set of planets, and we want to present that kind of an information to our Microsoft Teams users. So what they can do is in the messaging extension, this particular functionality will be available down bottom here. So once they click on that particular button, the Planet Explorer will open, which will show all of the planets that we have in our system. Once they click on any of the planet, that information will be sent out to a bot. Then bot will compose something called as adaptive card, and then that adaptive card will be posted onto Microsoft Teams message. Okay, so I know this sounds bit complex, but when we will explore them one by one, it is very straightforward. So simply that we will need four things here. First one is a bot, then we will need the Azure Web App to host this. Then we will need the SPFX web part, which the one which we can see on the screen now. And then we will need Microsoft Teams where this can be tested. Okay. So let's start with the bot. So for the bot, firstly, we will need the bot channel registration where we can host our bot and register that bot service. Secondly, that we will create our bot using your teams. So there are various ways in which we can create our bots. Even we can create those using Visual Studios. In our case, we will use your teams to create those bots. And then thirdly, we want to host this bot somewhere. So in a production ready environment, we will host it onto the Microsoft Azure web app. But just for the development purpose, even we can host it on ngrok or ngrok, whatever you want to say, and then it can be referred from there. Okay, so let's go into the demo portal. And here we are to the portal.azure.com, and here we have already created one bot channels registration. So even from here, you should be able to search for the bot channels registration. You can click here to create a new one. So when that bot channel registration is done, this is how it will look. So this is the resource group subscription ID or the messaging endpoint that we have it configured for this. The major thing here is the configuration. So once we go to the configuration, here we have this Microsoft App ID. This app ID we will have to note down to be used in our code. And then secondly, we have this messaging endpoint. So all of the messages which are being sent to this particular bot can be addressed through this URL. So from here, you can clearly see that right now it is running onto a local environment called as ngrok. So I have that ngrok running at this CBB66, which is here, you can see. So all of the messages which I will send to Microsoft Teams messaging extension, they will come to this bot. And then we do have this application ID and other things if you want to go beyond that. So for example, now if I click on manage for this application, so here we do have certificates and secrets to have any kind of a secure communication between this bot channel registration. The another important thing here is the channels, because we want to channelize this bot to Microsoft Teams. So for that purpose, we can add one of the featured channel as a Microsoft Teams. So again, there are various other channels available, including Alexa, Line, Slack, Telegram. But for our purpose, since we want to use this inside Microsoft Teams, we have this channel added. And then even we can create this Microsoft Azure web app, but right now we are just running it simply on ngrok. So before I proceed, I just want to show you this Your Teams bot that we have created. So I already have created this Your Teams bot. So it is a simple utility by which you will be able to create your bots in a Node.js kind of an environment. So in this particular bot, we do have all of our planets stored in a JSON format. So for each of that planet, we do have few properties like ID, name, summary, and many more things. So we have around 8 planets which are being shown in our demo. And then we have something called as this adaptive JSON card, or adaptive card in the format of a JSON. So when the bot will receive that message, it will post this adaptive card to the Microsoft Teams um, chat message. Okay, the major code is in this particular file, the Planet Explorer bot. So what happens is that whenever bot get the message, it can be get through this handler called as handle Teams messaging extension submit action. So from here, from this action, which is our second parameter here, from here we will be able to get all of the data which is sent by the user. So in our case, it will be just the planet, one planet which is selected by user. So we will get that selected planet from the user, then we will create our adaptive card. So here is the method which will just read this JSON file and it will fill out all those IDs which are specified in that JSON format with the actual information of that planet. Once it is done, it will send this activity using context.send activity. So that means we are simply sending this adaptive card to Microsoft Teams team, and then it will be shown to us. So second thing is that we will need SharePoint framework solution. Obviously, it will be created based on SPFX version 1.11. And then again, we don't have to extend that Teams manifest with Compose extension. And then we can even respond to the user interactions and then communicate with the bot. So let me quickly show you that SPFX web part 2. So even in this SPFX web part, we just have the supported host header set to SharePoint web part, not to Microsoft Teams anywhere. The major logic is from here. So in the manifest JSON that we have inside this Teams folder, we have something called as Compose extension, in which we are specifying that bot ID and the commands which will get invoked when any of the bot gets or any of the planet gets selected. And then again, we have this simple React presentation of the planets. So we are showing all those planets as a document card. And then when one of the planet gets clicked, we are simply sending that information to the bot, which will detect the selected planet, and then it will send that adaptive card onto the Microsoft Teams. For the deployment purpose, the deployment will be kind of a two-phase that we can prepare the SharePoint framework package, which is sppkg, by running these two commands, gulp bundle and gulp package solution. And then we can deploy that sppkg file that we have to the SharePoint tenant app catalog. Secondly, there will be an deployment to Microsoft Teams as well. So we have this Teams folder, which we can see here. So it contains three files like the manifest JSON, which is doing the major trick here to kind of expose this kind of an SPFX web part as a messaging extension inside Microsoft Teams. So we can zip that along with the two images that we have for our app, and then we can upload it to Teams. And then let's see how this works. So for that purpose, again, I will go back to my Microsoft Teams. Let me go to this channel that I specifically have. Once I click on this new conversation, so at the down bottom here, we have a Planet Explorer as a messaging extension available. So once we click on this, we get this nice document card, which is presented as a SPFX web part. So again, if I go simply to my SPFX code, all of those planets are nothing but these document cards that we have. So we see some card image and some information about this planet. So let's say we want to get in more information about the planet called as Venus. So we will click on this. So this click will send that information to the bot that the user is interested to know more about Venus planet, and then that bot will create something called as the adaptive card, which is this, and then it can be sent to the Microsoft Teams, and this is how it will be seen. So for example, let's say I will again click on the messaging extension one more time, and this time we want to get information about Uranus maybe. So I will click on that and we will get that information. So it happened too quick, but again, in the background, we do have our SPFX web part, which is showing all those planets. Then we do have a bot, which tries to see which planet was clicked, and then it sends out that adaptive card to the teams. So in a nutshell, it is like we can extend any of our SPFX web part that we have developed just for SharePoint, but it can be easily extended to Microsoft Teams using this manifest JSON, wherein we are simply exposing this particular web part as a Compose extension or the messaging extension inside Microsoft Teams. Now that even let's see how we can build Microsoft Teams meeting app with SPFX. So again, with the SPFX version 1.12, it supports for Microsoft Teams messaging, Teams meeting apps development. So this offers more power to the developers so that they can now extend SPFX web part to Microsoft Teams for building meeting app experiences. And then to expose our SPFX web part as Teams meeting app, again, we don't need to use any kind of those specific host, but it can be directly driven from the configurable tab extension. So let's quickly see what is mean by meeting app, and then we can go into the solution.
So in a pre-meeting app experience, so the permissions users are the users who can add apps to a meeting during a different stages of the meeting cycle. And these users can add apps to a meeting through the tab gallery in a two ways. The first one is using the details tab on the team scheduling form. The next one is using the team chat tab in an existing meeting. So the tab apps are accessible in a meeting details and chat pages using a plus button. Then in a in-meeting app experience, the meeting apps are hosted in the top upper bar of the chat window and as in-meeting tab experience using the in-meeting tab. So when users add a tab to a meeting to the tab gallery, apps that are during the meeting experience are shown. Also, the permission users can add apps while in the meeting. And in a post meeting app experience, permission users can add apps from the tab gallery to a meeting using the details tab on the team scheduling form and the meeting chat tab in an existing meeting.
So the example that we are going to see, or the demo that we are going to see now, is something related to the questionnaire meeting app. So this questionnaire meeting app is the custom app that has been created using SharePoint framework, SPFX, which provides pre-meeting kind of an app experience for Microsoft Teams meeting attendees so that they can ask questions related to that meeting before the meeting starts. And then during the meeting, all those questions uh, can be answered by the organizer or can be discussed within other attendees. So let's quickly see the demo of it and then we will go into the code part of it. So for that purpose, what I will do is again I will go back to the Microsoft Teams and then to the calendar. So from here I can just find out any of the slot which is empty slot, and then from here I will just schedule one meeting. So I will invite few attendees here or maybe just one attendee here to save the time. And then I will just click on send. So now that this meeting invite has been sent, secondly, what we can do is we can again open up this meeting invite. And then once you click on this plus icon here, we will be able to add more apps to this particular meeting. And then here we have our own custom app that is developed using SPFX, which is nothing but the meeting questionnaire app. So once we click on add, that app will get added to this tab. So it will just validate, and from here we'll be able to save, and this app should be here. So this app will provide some kind of an pre-meeting experience. So now that this app is here, so let's say if I close this meeting invite, again come back to this meeting invite, so this experience will be same for all the users. So once I open this invite, I see this meeting questionnaire tab here, which is nothing but our custom component. Once we click on this new question, we can post the question like, will this be recorded? Okay, and then this particular question will be sent out to the organizer. So that means it will stay here. Even the other users, they will be able to see this questionnaire. So what can happen is that when the meeting will start, the organizer can go to this particular tab, similar to this. He can go to that meeting questionnaire tab, and then from here he will be able to see all of the questions that has been asked so far, and all those questions can be answered during that meeting. So this is how we can simply build that experience of pre-meeting kind of an experience. So let's go into the code part of it. So again, this particular solution has been developed using SPFX web part. Again, we are not using any kind of a supported host for Microsoft Teams here. It is a simple SharePoint web part. Then we have one service with which we are talking to SharePoint, because in the previous session that at least we saw like whenever there is a team in the background, there will be a SharePoint site. So we are using that particular SharePoint site, and on that SharePoint site we have created our own list, and in that list now we are placing all those meeting IDs, title, description, like what has been sent by the user or whatever the questions which are asked by those users. And this particular service will help us to add the question to that SharePoint list. as well as get all those questionnaires from that SharePoint list. The major thing here is this SPFX web part is built with React component. So in the React, we have just one primary button here, which will help us to add more question to this particular pre-meeting experience. And then down here, we have something called as an activity. So in that, we are showing all those activities which are happening for this particular meeting. So let's say, for example, if someone will add more questions, they will keep appearing here. And then this is a simple web part. For the action question, ask a question. Again, we do have another separate React component through which we are giving this capability that once we click on this add button or this new question button, this will give us a pop-up in which we will be able to type our title and the description that we have. And once we again click on save, this save will call our service that we have, and this question will get added to that SharePoint list. So on a simple basis, we have created this solution which can be used for the pre-meeting kind of an experience. So this is again another way by which you will be able to extend your SharePoint apps or the SharePoint web parts that you have developed as a meeting experiences. So again, it could be the pre-meeting experience, in-meeting experience, or the post-meeting experience. So let's say, for example, even if you want to build any kind of a post-meeting experience, in that case, you can create some kind of an SPFX web part which can be shown when the meeting has ended, so that if there is any kind of an suggestions or any kind of a discussion that has happened, or even if you want to present some kind of an MOM for that particular meeting, those kind of an scenarios can also be built with SPFX. So in a nutshell, that we saw like these SPFX apps that we have been developing so far for almost 2 decades now, they can be easily ported to Microsoft Teams without rewriting anything. So we can just simply play around with those configuration, and then those SPFX web part can be ported to Microsoft Teams to be used as a custom tab or personal app, even the messaging extension, or even the Teams meeting app. So I hope that was interesting. So here are few of the resources which you can use if you want to learn more about this. And again, the reference to a couple of my blogs I have written on to how we can create those messaging extension as well as the Teams meeting app kind of an experience with SPFX. And then all of the code which we have shown you right now are available at GitHub. So the questionnaire Teams meeting app is available in the PNP repository, and this the Planet Explorer is available under my personal repository, but it is a public one. So please do see those code samples. If you have any suggestions, please let them come. So I hope that was useful. So thank you very much for having us here. And if there are any questions, we can take those, and we really appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending.